Welcome to Professor's Corner. I'm joined by Melissa, and we're having a conversation about applied ethics and public policy. In particular, this week, we're looking at the ethical dimensions of public policy, and we've been looking at some questions.
Yes, in fact, last time we were talking about where ethics intersects with public policy, and where do those two intersect?
Well, if we step back and we're looking very globally now at metaphysics and culture, and we're going to be working our way down to specific analysis and specific context before the course ends. So what one of our theses is that we don't, as Christians, want to exclude metaphysics or metaethics.
Yes.
We think that facts have a wider understanding than the materialist who says only those things that we can observe. So when we think about the intersection, we have to think about two areas leap to mind: science and ethics, or science and religion, or political structures and public policy. So there are two dominant features of Western culture that have actually merged within the West that you won't see in other place on the globe, and that's science and technology and liberal democracy. And interestingly enough, Melissa, both of these structures originated from the Christian worldview. The Western mindset at the same time has also had as sort of attitudes, if we can assign it to that, of being critical. So the very scheme that gave rise to science, technology, and political liberalism, now these schemes are actually criticizing the metaphysical or religious framework. So there is where the tension comes in. So let's take a look first at the triumph of science. So I guess the first question might be here: how do science? What is it that? How
do science and ethics fit together?
Exactly. And so the first thing is you have to have an intelligent or intelligible world by which to look at. And the other feature is that speculative reason alone was not enough. We needed to have sort of observation and experiment. And in certain primitive ways, rudimentary ways, 200-300 years ago, these sort of ideas were emerging within the Christian mindset. And it's these sort of general ways. They've taken on refinements in more contemporary settings, but these are the sort of things that people have intellectually thought about, and that's why we can connect science and liberal democracy to the public policy and the current situation that we're in. Now, interestingly enough, in this class we're going to be working with ethics and public policy.
Yes.
And we've tried to pick out, people that are thinking about issues or relevant issues from a Christian point of view as well as a secular point of view, because you're going to end up in a secular environment. Right? You're going to end up in a secular environment. And so it's important to already be exposed to the types of arguments, and they're very sophisticated arguments. And we may not totally get answers to all these arguments in this class, but we're going to try to give you some tools to work with. This person here is a secular writer, and interestingly enough, he's going to be anti-metaphysical.
Okay.
So we're already going to be jousting with this person. Some things we'll accept, some things we'll have to interact on. At the same time, this gentleman is working from a biblical point of view, Mansma, and he is going to be giving you sort of some Christian ideas in terms of these issues that we'll be talking about. And then what we're going to be doing a lot of reading, and I just want to mention this to students, and I'm very mindful, this book is out of print. It was a famous Gifford lecture given between 1974 and 1976. We're making it available online free out of the Gifford Lecture Center. But it is a challenging book to read, and I'm mindful of that. But the author, Basil Mitchell, is very, very insightful into political liberalism and criticizing it from a Christian point of view. And so I wish there were other places we could go to get other readings, but these will help, and we'll bring these together. Just be mindful of what you're reading when you're reading it.
Great.
Okay. So
I think I'm understanding how science can sort of threaten the Christian worldview. in that it forces you to take these religious convictions out of the picture. And in some cases,
Yeah.
depending on the individual, not every person who is a proponent of science would be that way, but many would be.
Exactly, and the scientist, if they want to impose the scientific method on everything we know about the world, this is where the issue sort of arises, because for Christians, right, a fact is more than what is just observed.
Right. Does that get us into a little bit of facts and values and how we feel about those?
It does. It does. In fact, we might take a look at it by way of introducing that question. We might just make note of the fact that that people tend to want to think of this reality in terms of those things we can observe,
yes,
strictly speaking,
right,
either by touch or in a laboratory.
Our five senses.
Our five senses. And that's all there is to reality, and that the other is everything else is value, right? Emotion, anything invisible. So where the tension comes in, and you're going to experience this as a policy specialist, is that that we tend to want to attach authority to science. And in the public policy arena, that's what's happening. And so consequently, you're studying sociology, economics, psychology, you're reading epidemiology, if it's public health, health economics, whatever it is, everybody wants to talk science. And the problem of it is, Melissa, is that the debates are larger than the science that we can use to bolster our case. And part of our task is to make more explicit those ethical dimensions.
So there's the facts, and then there's these other values that we're bringing in. So maybe what some might call more subjective, our feelings,
yes,
our emotions.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they want to keep things very objective. Well, we can apply that. We applaud that. I mean, in the sense that we think morality should be objective.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, will my ethical scheme be acceptable to a secular person?
Right.
But the tension here that happens is what we call the separation of fact and value, or the fact-value dichotomy, where if your analysis is, as a more empirical mindset, is to separate out the fact and the value, and then to discredit value and only operate on fact, but we need the values to help us interpret the fact. You can see where the conflict is going to come in. So, so the issue here is to try that we're trying to do. If fact is being separated, we're trying to bring back the two together.
Yes.
But we will have, as Christians, we'll have an intellectual apparatus too by which we filter. We recognize that the difference between reality and fantasy as well. We understand that certain things that are cultural are perhaps there because they meet human needs, and other things maybe need to be reformed. So it's not as though as Christians we don't have a critical mindset in ethics as well.
Yes. There's a issue on the table recently, the gender issue, and my understanding of the issue is that we've got the individuals who want to focus on the biology, and individuals who want to focus and see it more as a binary split, and then there's individuals who see gender as a spectrum and more what's inside of you that's determining your feelings, your emotions.
Yes.
Does that play into this?
It does, and it's a very good example because it's so contemporaneous. Let's just to illustrate the theoretical point of fact-value dichotomy, let's just say there's biology and psychology, and then there's the assessment of biology and psychology. The assessment will be the value. Now, historically, because of natural law theory, our ethics, the God who created the world, and so we believe in creation ethics, right? That's authoritative. We attach significance to our nature. Not every aspect about our nature, but we believe that somehow in there our human nature is good. Yes, we're sinful beings, but that God has created us as physical beings, and we want to take that into account. Now, in this particular debate, we have assessed a value to our created biology that we don't want to discard it. We realize there's cancer and there's deformities and we want to restore. But there's also a sense in which people say, well, forget biology. This is what I'd like to do. And let's just use medicine to sort of create us and what, remake us. And so consequently, you see that in this where somebody might say, well, that's my biology. Here's my psychology, and I attach significance to psychology. So I want the psychology piece to transcend the biology. And that gets us into this whole issue.
And in order to have a fruitful conversation on this, you need to understand where people are coming from and think about how perhaps these facts and values can fit together in order to have a meaningful discussion with someone over this topic.
Exactly.
Perhaps.
Exactly. Now, what emerges from this is when we have the fact value is people want to talk about, I gave you a little diagram here on the private morality. Some people want to talk about public morality. These are the things of which we sort of commonly agree to, and then private morality. And we'll have to talk a little about what these concepts mean, but the private morality is sort of how shall I live, and the public morality is how shall we live, right? Or how shall we as human beings live, as opposed to how shall I live. This distinction on its face doesn't, just because something is in the private realm doesn't mean that it's non-rational or irrational or not subject to being true or false. But that's, again, where the contemporary debate is, because some people think private morality is something that is you cannot rationally judge.
How would you define private morality and public morality?
Let's start with private morality first. There are three nuances. One would be traditionally, which is the government shouldn't interfere in this realm. In other words, it's not that there can't be a social moral debate and judgment in the private realm. It's just that before we bring government to bear, particularly in liberal political structure, and I mean liberal here, not in terms of
conservative and liberal. You're talking liberal in terms of a free democracy, democratic nation.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so we just want to be sure that not everything, we don't bring the law to bear on everything, right? We want to keep it somewhat minimal. So the first notion of private is just as an area that we'll talk about in this class, but that we don't have, the government doesn't interfere. The second sense of private is, well, it's acts that affect only me, but not anybody else, or not anybody else in any significant kind of a way. That's the second sense of which an act is private. Then the more controversial is this whole idea that morality acts, the morality of our actions are properly a matter only of private judgment, and private in the sense that it's personal. There's no way to adjudicate between a judgment about what type of institution of marriage that we should have, or what type of
belief we should have about. I'm thinking of the issue with legalization of marijuana,
yes,
for example.
Yes, exactly. That somehow these are choices that you can't make about drug use or something like that.
And how do you decide what's okay in your private life, but then what should we allow in the broader public sphere? Exactly.
So now the public morality, of course, we've already mentioned. It's the shared beliefs,
right,
which that we have, and they're the cement that hold. We use those to sort of handle conflicts. We tend to associate public morality with law, but but at least it's always going to be rational. And the fact value dichotomy in our diagram is that you'll see the little highlighted line outside of public morality around private. That is that sharp value of fact and value, because some people will argue only those things that are rational by the standards they're going to give to rationality are the public realm, and everything else is in the private realm. And that leads us to a last statement that we're going to spend a couple of minutes on, which is a critical proposition connecting public policy and morality. And that is that public policy may be used to preserve a shared morality that is necessary for the existence of society. Okay? We've heard this before, that a society needs a morality, okay? And the question becomes, what is that morality, that shared morality? How do we understand that? And what do we mean by the existence of society? Because it would seem like certain things can change in morality, and society doesn't fall apart, right? So by shared morality, we can mean this is that de facto populist common morality. And if we hold that to be intrinsically valuable in and of itself, then a society can never change, right? So another way of thinking of the shared morality is that it's instrumentally valuable, okay? And that it can therefore change, but we want to know why and what we're changing.
That's why we've got to bring our evidence in. That's why we've got to get people that are knowledgeable in the facts and the values and all kinds. We have to bring a lot of people together to make the best judgments.
Exactly. And the second term in that proposition is the idea of existence, right? It could be just a simple existential threat that if we change something, society is going to fall apart. We oftentimes say, if our Christian beliefs aren't part of America, society will fall apart. And the secular person will say,
no.
No.
Right.
Exactly. So what's happening there is we're thinking of existence in terms of institutions that are essential for a quality or decent type of life, a way of life. So when we talk about American exceptionalism, and we feel like somehow on the issue take of immigration, right? It's not about a closed border. It's really about, can a particular nation define its identity, a way of life? And there's certain institutions that are useful to this, that are critical. So there we're saying that it's not that society would automatically fall apart, but we would be a different society than what we judge to be of value. So look at it this way, in kind of concluding on this point. When we say public policy may be used to preserve the shared morality that's necessary for the existence of society, are we, if we take it in one sense, that it would be any morality as long as it's some morality? Okay, that's one way to read that proposition. The other is to say, no, we have a particular quality of morality that we have in mind, and that rather than any morality, because you could have an aristocratic society that's coherent, you know, Brave New World. What was offensive about that book is the fact that people enjoyed their degradation, but they had a morality that held that society together imaginatively. Or alternatively, we could be saying, no, a society exists because of those principles. A decent society exists because of those principles that are already in place, like that society honors a respect for life, a sanctity of human life, for example, as opposed to one that has a different view of life. And so it's not just any morality, it's a list of principles. And we're going to be defending that latter approach.